Alright, so I have this little table I've had for a while that a friend gave me to upcycle, and I just thought I've got enough stencils to use and to give the little top a little makeover to jazz it up a little bit. So I dragged all my stencils down. Now I'm slightly addicted to cutting stencils because I love it, the creative process. I've got a few different ones. I do barn signs as well, so some lettering ones. I put them up there. That's a Christmassy sign. This was very good for this centerpiece of a trunk that I was doing. There's another one. It says a love. Oh, upside down love. I cut them out of acetate, just using a kind of boring craft knife, just ones that you can buy for £1. I've got a few. I think I've got one stencil that you can buy. I bought this dandelion one. And I don't actually use that this because it's too boring, but I mask bits out and use it. I don't like things to look too uniform, and these ones that are cut like with lasers, they don't look very naturalistic, so I like to have a bit of wobble in them. Now, this was a border that I cut for a trunk I was doing. I think that's too fancy for this little table, but this is exactly what I'm looking for, this one here. I've got a corner, and I hope I can fit it round, and it's kind of fit perfectly there. Right, let's have a little look at this. So I think this is going to work beautifully. So all I need to do is, obviously I can't varnish straight onto here because it's highly polished, and any paint I use is not likely to stick very well. So I need to create a bit of key on the surface. I'm going to do that by sanding. I don't need to sand it right back to the bare wood. I just need to get a rough surface. And to do that, I'm going to use sandpaper and even a sanding block, which I normally lose when I need. I'm just going to give it a quick sand. I'll show you what I want it to look like. So I'm just roughing up all the surface with some kind of sandpaper. I'm not pressing really hard because I only want to rough up the surface. Now, this varnish starts to go this kind of cloudy colour, but some of that is dust and some of it. So when I use a wet wipe to wipe it off, then I let it dry, and then you'll see it will reveal what's actually roughed up and what isn't, because the stuff that isn't actually rubbed off will go back shiny. So basically this is what it looks like before you've wiped it, and this is what it looks like after, which you can see is not nearly as well sanded as you feel that you've done it. So you have to basically work and wipe, then let it dry, and what you want it to look like is dull all over. Let that dry. I've just changed my sandpaper to make it a slightly finer grade so that I'm getting less of these scratches. I'm going to let that dry now, and we'll see what it looks like in a minute. So actually this works really well, because what I've done is I've sanded round the border of this table, and I've continually wiped it down and then let it dry, and you can now see that the middle bit is beautifully glossy where the varnish hasn't been removed, and then round the edge you can see it's just duller. In places you can see where I've worn off the varnish entirely, but that's okay because I will just replace that, I think, because I want the dark background to my light coloured stencil. But mostly it looks the same colour, but it's just duller. I've just lifted the camera up a bit more, hold on, in a wobbly way, and you can see that the edge is dull, and that's the bit where I'm going to put my first stencil. But I think in the meantime I'm going to sand the rest of it, because I do want to sand in the middle. I haven't totally decided, but I was thinking of doing a whole table treatment. So let me get on with that. So I've done a lot of sanding, and I've done wiping, and I've let it dry. And then just to check all my surfaces ready, I'm going to go over the surface of the wood, and I'm going to just check for any really shiny bits that I think need a little dub up. It will go over again, like here. I'm going to go over again. Mostly this is looking nice and dull, and that's the kind of surface. Now over here I've over sanded a bit because it's the light coloured underneath wood is showing through, but I'm going to touch that back up again. As I said, I'll touch it back up after I've done the stenciling. I think there needs perhaps a little bit more sanding here. You just want to make sure that your stenciling is going to stick, so you don't want any shiny glossy surface. And then I think we're nearly good to go. Right, so I'm good to go with the stenciling. Now, obviously I didn't design this stencil for this piece of furniture, so it doesn't quite fit perfectly. And what I've done is I've marked off the middle point on each of the sides. If I just lift it up, you'll see how I've done that. There you go. And I can see that the middle point here means I need to cut that flower off. So I'm going to put a bit of tape over there to mask that. And then I'll get stenciling. Now, I use just emulsion paint. And I stipple with a sponge, not a brush, because it's just easier. And I just roughly cut around the edges of the sponge because you don't want any straight lines. If you use the straight edges, then sometimes you get a straight line. So to make it look rough and to make the edges look invisible, I'm just going to use a sponge and dab, 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 which I'll show you in a second. So here I am, and I've fastened the stencil down. You don't want it to move. I've masked the bit off that I don't want. And here's my paint. And I'm going to... You don't want too much, because if you put too much, then it will blob under, because you just want to lightly... I'm filming and stippling, so I'm not going to be able to do much of this. I'm just very lightly dabbing. You don't want to press too hard, or it's going to bulge underneath. You can keep going for quite a lot. There you go. I'll just show you a little bit of a close-up look. A nice stippled look. I haven't pressed hard, so the edges should be nice and clear, but it doesn't matter too much if they're not, because you can neaten up afterwards if you need to. That's the nice thing about stenciling. It's really quite forgiving. The main point is to remember is not to get too much paint on. If you feel you've got too much paint off, just rub it off. I think I had a bit of a blob there. You're better with too little than too much, and just build up layers. And the fun bit, of course, is when you get to lift it off at the end. I'll show you in a second. So I think I'm just about ready to pull off. Now you'll see my sponge is not saturated with paint. I've just dabbed it on. Think about if you were dabbing a cut on your knee, that kind of gentleness that you do. And then the fun bit is peeling it off. And there is your lovely stencil underneath. I'm trying to see, right, over here, this is a classic example of where too much paint has gone and it's bulged under. So I can always have a little go at that with a wet wipe now, or afterwards I'll get a bit of dark paint and collating, because I don't really like that. But there isn't too much of it because I just dabbed really, really lightly. But it's not a precious craft. You can adjust things later on. That's completely fine. So I'll have a little go at that with a wet wipe now, I think. Right, ready to do my next, but I'm just going to wash my acetate. I just do with water and a washing up brush, and then I need to let that dry. You can't stencil the wet ones. I'll put it on the radiator to dry for 10 minutes, and then we'll be ready for the next one. So my stencil's washed now. The only kind of washing I like to do is stencil washing, and that is because if you don't wash them, then the paint builds up. So in my teenage years, when I used to first explore cutting stencil, I used to use cardboard. And what happens is when you've used them lots of times, they start to build up, and then your definition loses. You start to lose the edges, and they don't look so neat over time. So acetate is brilliant because you can just wash it clean, and then you're ready and good to go for the next bit. But you need to make sure it's totally dry. You don't want any water mixing with the paint now, because it will make it splooge underneath the stencil. Now, with your sponge as well, don't wash them in between. And if it gets too wet, you'll need to change your sponge, because you don't want any water, because it will dilute it, and again you'll have that horrible squelchy paint edge that's really messy. For example, like this, it would all look like that. That's just like a little tiny spot of it. You want a little bit, that looks part of the look, but you want to keep the definition as much as you can. So we're ready for the next one now. All right, so I've turned my stencil over, and I've lined these edge lines up here, because I want to make sure everything matches, and I'm just going to start stenciling this one now. And here we are. Now I may decide to do something in the middle there, because I think it looks a bit bare, but there isn't room for the flower that's on the original stencil, but I'll sort that out later. I'm going to do all the sides first. And the other thing I'm going to do is, these little gaps in the line, I will fill those in with a small paintbrush, because I like a complete line. I just think it looks a bit, I just like that look more. I think it makes it look a bit cooler. Right, I'm going to get on with the rest of this now. Just wanted to show you that I'm patting my stencil dry. I've washed it in hot water, and I'm patting it dry because it needs to be completely dry. I might pop it on the top of the radiator for a couple of minutes to make sure that all the water's off it, ready to do the next bit. I've got a soft piece of cotton, old cotton rag here. There we go. So here we go, I've lined it all up again, masked out anything I don't want to touch with the new bit of paint. My corners are all lined up and we are good to go. That's a little bit too much paint, let's wipe that off. Now we're good to go. Just to show you a little bit of touch up, I've got a little wipe on my nail and I'm just going to get rid of that mistake there. There you go. I can touch that white bit up again later, but I wanted to get rid of that excess paint. That's looking good. Alright, so this is coming along. Just to show you how I only use a few little bits of tape to stick it down. You only need, because you don't want to stick on top of paint you've just done in case it peels it back off again. And you only need a little bit of tape to hold it down. It's actually loose on that side, but that's fine because I'm only going to tap gently. Right, let's get on with this next bit. Okay, so I had a little think about what to put in the middle of this, and I've decided to cut a little stencil because I haven't got anything quite right to fit in that space. So I'm just going to cut this and then do that on all four sides. And here's that little stencil. There you go. So I'm going to do that all the way around now. Alright, so finally I'm going to use a paintbrush and I'm going to fill in all these little gaps to make it look like this is a continuous line rather than a broken line. Right, there we have the finished border, all ready to dry till tomorrow when I want to start the next line of pattern inside. Happy with that. So I found this stencil in my, I don't know where this is from, I think it might be for card making. I think someone gave it to me. It's not very good because it's opaque, so you can't line it up properly, which means I've already messed it up here, and the other join there is not very even, which is a bit of a shame, but I had it in my thing and I think it will look good overall, as I'm going to do quite a dense pattern, so I'm going to keep going with it. I'm going to also have to work out how to join it because it's not going to fit perfectly, but we'll go with it and see what it looks like. So I've managed to fit it all the way around, and I've only had to do a few half squares like here, which actually looks fine if it's not just like a third of a square or something odd. You can, because these tiles are symmetrical, doing a half actually looks all right, so I'm quite pleased with that. Considering it was just a stencil that I got from nowhere, I don't know what it is. Right, so now I've just got to decide what to do for the next layer or the next ring. So for the next bit of the table, I designed this stencil for a Scandi design I was doing. So it's this kind of naive, simplistic flower. But I think if I get rid of that flower and just have the leaves, and I've got this single stalk of the berry elsewhere in the design over here, so I think that will tie it together. Because this is a very dense pattern here, I think this will be make a stripe that's a little bit, it's got a little bit of more dark space in it. Yeah, I quite like that. I think I'll go for that. Right, so here we got another line of pattern, and I think it's turned out all right. I'm a bit annoyed because I didn't think it through properly. So I've got a long line here and a short line here, and I should have thought that through when I placed it. But I think that's all part of the charm of stenciling, really. That it's a little bit on the wonk, it doesn't look perfect. You can see that it's made by hand. Obviously the outer line and this one are hand cut as well, so they're not perfectly straight like they would be with a laser. And I think on the whole, I'm really pleased with that. Very satisfying. Okay, so this is my thinking. This little stencil pack that has miraculously appeared, I can see now that it's like Day of the Dead stuff, isn't it? It's got that skull. These are marigolds, and this, I think, those hanging flags. But I think if I just use that square in the middle, it would be like a tile. and as we've got a kind of Moroccan look going on. So what I've done is I've divided the table into 4, and I'm going to do 4 of these tiles in the middle, and then maybe use that one again, and we'll see. I'll do the middle, and then I'm going to have a little gap which I can fill in later, but I think I need to be careful here because I want to make sure the middle is symmetrical. I don't mind things looking a bit rough and ready, but you've got to get your central bits central, otherwise it will spoil the whole look of it. So that's my plan for this one so far. All right, so I've done a little bit of dabbing. Let's see what this has come out like. Yay, perfect. So now I'm going to do another 3 and have a little quartet of these. They do look like tiles, don't they? I like that. So I've got a glamorous assistant for a minute so you can see my sponge action. I'm doing the 3rd tile here, and I've just laid a piece of paper because I don't want to tape directly onto the last tile because it might still be wet. So I've got a little bit of paint from my paint lid there, and I'm just like, I guess it's like stippling, isn't it, but with a sponge. So just, you only want a small amount on your sponge. You don't want kind of any lumps. And then and you can see where it's dark because it hasn't gone on, so I'm going to get a bit more on my sponge, and then a bit more again. And while it's still wet, you can just go over and layer it up a little bit. And then that looks about right, doesn't it? Now we're going to lift it up, so move these out of the way. And then, excellent. And there you have it with the middle tiles in place. So now I've just got to fill in that blank section of the table, and then we'll be done. So a little rummage in my stencils, and it's turned up this kind of simple flower that I cut for something else. But what I like is this little dotty border that it's got. I think it will look really nice. Well, it does look nice along the edge of the tile here, and that's partly because it matches the dots here. It's because it's done with a hole punch, so it's exactly the same size, so it kind of echoes, and then that echoes itself these ones that are also done with a hole punch, and these which are slightly larger that I cut by hand. I think that looks quite nice, and I want to create, because this is so dense, I want to create a little bit of kind of space for your eye to rest. And then I've just got a little bit to fill in there. Let's get on with finishing this. All right, so I've done the dotty border, and now I'm trying to decide what to do. Part of me likes that kind of dark border, but then I think it would look a bit odd with the isolated tiles in the middle, so I probably do need to fill it in. Now, I have noticed that this kind of little stencil does now fit perfectly in that space, and I could do a repeat round all of the sides, and I could maybe use like this flower here and put that up there to tie these 2 borders together, because I am just using lots of stencils that weren't intended to be together. That might work. I'll perhaps have a little go and see what it looks like. Right, I'm just using a little brush now to touch up any bits where paint has gone where I don't want it to go, neaten up any blurring, and because this is dark varnish over a light coloured wood, some of my sanding removed it a bit too far back, so some of the light wood shows through. So I'm just going to use a little bit of dark acrylic paint to neaten up those little errors and neaten the whole general appearance. Okay, to finish off, I'm going to put some yacht varnish on this, probably a couple of coats, because it's a tabletop, it needs to be really heat proof and spill proof. So here's the table all nicely varnished. You can see it's glossy if you look up close. Perfect. I think this one's good to go now. I like that.